raspberry range.
78-year-old Samuel Little sits across a table from a Texas Ranger, matter-of-factly describing how he took the lives of many of his victims. He's frail, wheelchair-bound, and has heart disease and diabetes. With armed guards around him, he talks about how he got away with over 90 murders in 19 states over a period of decades. He doesn't seem to have a care in the world, which is why he's been described as pure evil. From 1970 to 2005, this man traveled from state to state, covering much of the U.S. in search of vulnerable women that would satisfy his deranged needs. In 1971, in Kendall, Florida, there was a Sarah or Donna. He describes this Jane Doe perfectly, and then sketches her face for investigators. He does the same for a 25-year-old woman he says he met outside a strip club in 1984 when driving to Cincinnati. Slight of frame, short blonde hair, blue eyes, and with the look of what he calls a hippie. Her fate was sealed when she got in the car. These confessions, with their detailed descriptions, and it has to be said, fairly accomplished sketches, not only surprised investigators, but rocked the USA. The authorities knew very well that Little wasn't making it up. Not all his confessions have been confirmed, but enough of them have for the FBI to announce that Mr. Little is the most prolific serial killer. Before we get into some of those cases, and how on earth he got away with his crimes, what do we know about Samuel Little? We know he was born on June 1940 in the small town of Reynolds, Georgia. This is that right now only has a population of just over 1,000, with the poverty line. According to Little, he wasn't exactly having his mother's job of being a lady of the night. It's thought he was born in prison after his teenage mother had been arrested for plying what some people have called the oldest trade in the world. At one point, she gave up trying to look after her son and ditched him on the side of the road. That's a reason why, when growing up, Little spent a good deal of his time living with his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio. He attended Hawthorne Junior High School in Ohio, but it seems his grades were poor and behavior even poorer. He soon dropped out and set in motion what would become a lifetime of crime. At age 16 in 19... crime of breaking and entering, and spent some time in a juvenile detention center. 5 years later, he was sent to adult prison after being arrested for breaking into a Lorain furniture store. For the rest of his free life, he moved from state to state, holding down jobs, but always committing crimes. It's believed that before the man hit 35 years old, he was arrested at least 26 times in 11 states. Crimes included assault, theft, fraud, DUI, breaking and entering, solicitation, armed robbery, shoplifting, aggravated assault on a police officer, and more. The police know, though, by this time he'd already started killing. By that time, the mid-70s rolled around. Stealing through the day and going out looking for women at night was how he spent many of his days. Those women were almost always African Americans living on the fringes of society. They were women who worked as prostitutes, or were addicted to drugs, or were homeless and living in shelters, or all of those things. Little once commented, "They was broke and homeless, and they walked right into my spiderweb." His modus operandi didn't often change in that he went to places where the most vulnerable people could be found, and then he befriended them. Sometimes he'd offer them a ride in his car. Sometimes he'd ask to go for a drink with them. At other times, he tempted them with the promise of drugs. Once they'd gotten into his car, they had a little chance of surviving. This was a strong man, a muscular man who'd fought as a light heavyweight boxer. He'd often knock his victims clean out before strangling them, an act which gratified his perverse desires. Sometimes he'd stroke their necks, feigning intimate kindness, and then his powerful hands would tighten around them. His crimes shouldn't have gone on for as long as they did, but as you'll find out later, his choice of a victim was very likely the reason why he could do what he did and get away with it. He almost came unstuck at the start, though. On September 11th, 1976, died behind her with electrical pounding on a stranger's house. Drug addict said Little had picked her up in the city of St. Louis, around for a while, and then parked in a quiet area. Little attacked her. She managed. Cops found Little still in his car. He denied any kind of motive for the attack and said, in his own words, "I only beat her." For that crime, he spent just 3 months in the county jail. Had she not escaped, that could have been a murder. Had she not been in trouble with the law in the past for her heroin addiction, might have been scrutinized a little more. In 1982, a disabled woman named Patricia was found in Forest Grove, Florida. last seen dancing with a man in a tavern. The man was Samuel Little. Acquitted of the crime, with the defense attorney found then there is fact. Many years later, know that he indeed had committed that murder. She wasn't his only victim in Florida. Melinda Rose Lapre. Her body was found in 1982 in Pascagoula. Had a long time, so the body was in a state of advanced decomposition. Help investigators. The night missing, she'd been working as a prostitute. When she left the streets in a station, other women on the street saw the man who was driving the car. They gave a description. Picked up in a traffic stop, he was taken in for questioning. Not only did one of those women pick out his image in a photo lineup, but another woman came forward and said he assaulted her in the past. The problem was, prosecutors said there was no with the murder. They said a positive ID wasn't enough to take the case to trial, so Little was allowed to go. And even the fact that the district attorney's office said it wasn't happy about prosecuting a man, prostitutes, prostitutes. Such discrimination is ethical, but it's not that unusual, and so unusual in the past. You'll see there's a term in the world of crime called the less dead people. Folks that serial killers often prey on. They're most disenfranchised citizens, folks who can go missing, and sometimes they end up as have an ID. Due to their low socioeconomic status and cases their rap sheet, they might not exactly drum up a lot of sympathy from the public or be the most homicide detectives. They were seen less valued before they died. Even though you'd think they'd elicit the most sympathy given their difficult circumstances. This is how one person described how law enforcement sometimes treats the less dead. A great deal less pressure is felt by the police when victims of crime come from the marginal elements. Samuel Little knew what he was doing by targeting society's most vulnerable. He talked about it once in an interview, saying, "I never killed no senators or governors or fancy New York journalists. Nothing like that. I kill a journalist, it'd be all over the news the next day. I stayed in the ghettos." The FBI has since said that many of his victims didn't look as though they'd been murdered. Since he punched and strangled the women, police often thought the cause of death was a drug overdose or an accident.
Why are you guys going?
To the trash room.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? But I need to finish one last one.